Thank you for joining us today for this panel, which is entitled The Naked Me, and I slightly fear we will deliver less than the title promises, but that may be a good thing. Anne doesn't mind, apparently, so you can ask questions at the end and see where we get to. So we are here to discuss the surge in documentaries that we've seen over the past couple of years for presenters to address deeply personal and sometimes incredibly moving and difficult stories in documentary. We've had Rio Ferdinand explore his process of grieving on screen. Chris Packham has revealed all about his Asperger's. Sally Phillips has explored Down syndrome. Zoe Ball's suicide. Patrick Kilty has talked about the death of his father. Ollie Alexander about growing up gay. And Alex Jones about infertility. We used to be a country that was renowned for a stiff upper lip and for not betraying emotions. So this panel is going to explore and try and ask some questions about what has given rise to this fashion for revelatory personal documentary, and does it speak to anything going on more broadly in British society? And I'm joined by an esteemed panel. Starting from the end is Matt Smith, who directed the BAFTA award-winning Rio Ferdinand documentary Being Mum and Dad. Then Anita Rani, who is the RTS award-winning presenter of the year, who is known for many things, but is here to discuss her family documentary about partition. Mim Shaikh, who is poet, actor and DJ, and who is still actually filming a documentary about the search for his father, who he's never known. And finally, the incomparable broadcasting legend, Anne Robinson, who opened up to us on our screens on BBC Two about her own personal abortion and about the issue of abortion more generally. Before we start, we're going to see a show reel that will show you some of the documentaries that we're talking about today. So I'm really keen that this panel feels like a proper conversation and discussion and even argument at points. So I'm not going to do that thing where it's really blocky and we go through each person, but I am conscious you may not all be familiar with the documentaries that we're talking about here. So very briefly, I am going to just ask everyone on the panel to outline what their documentary was about and sort of in headline terms how they came to do it. Anne, if we start with you.
It's quite scary because there's a lot of important women in television here. It's not like a normal panel, a normal audience, is it? It was 50 years since the Abortion Act, and we wanted to do something that marked that in a really meaningful way. And that came down to asking women to talk about their abortions, and we couldn't find an example of that ever having been done on television, nor examining whether the law that was 50 years old was in any way appropriate for today.
And so in your documentary, there were a group of women who had all had abortions and came
There were
together.
8 women and 1 man, and they came to my home, and we spent 3 or 4 days together, either chatting with each other or singly, just in a way thrashing it out, because they all had different experiences and they all had different opinions about abortion. So it's one of the most touching and real pieces, the most real piece of television that I have done in 50 years. That's all I can say.
Mim, if you can.
So my documentary came about because I've always questioned where my father is in my life, and I've never seen a picture until since we started making the documentary. So I always had the idea that I wanted to go and do this, but the only way that I feel that it will be able to be done in the most truthful and authentic way is by being able to do it through an art form. And I think documentary was the best way for me to go and do that. So I decided to pitch it to a production company that came up to me and asked me if I wanted to make a documentary. And then they were absolutely amazed by the idea, thought it was such a unique and individual story, couldn't quite believe it. And then the BBC basically greenlit it and said, we're ready, we want to see this being made. And we're currently still in the process of making it right now.
Anita?
So I was lucky enough to make a Who Do You Think You Are a couple of years ago, and because I'm British but of Indian origin, it was really difficult. Well, they couldn't get me a visa to go to Pakistan, so I had unfinished business on one level, but also the reaction I got off the back of my Who Do You Think You Are was huge. Social media blew up, people stopping me in the streets. Across the board, white British community saying, how do we not know about this bit of history? This is the end of empire. And then the British Asian community saying, and particularly young British kids, this is what affected me the most, saying, we don't know about this history, and it's our history. And they had no idea. They were saying, we'd vaguely heard Granny say something, but she's never spoken about it. And one person on Twitter actually said to me, an Asian kid said, I didn't realise that Pakistan and India were one country. So I went to the Beeb and said, listen, this needs to be addressed, and I'd love to make a programme about it, and this is an idea, what do you think? And they went, OK, eventually, here you go and make a programme. But it was really important that we told the story through the 4 different storylines. So there was a Sikh story, a Muslim story, a Hindu story, and for me, really important to have a white British family as well as part of that, because Britain had been there for 200 years, and so we're very much part of the fabric of what India was about at that time. And it was massive, life-changing.
And Matt, slightly different for you.
So I directed Rio Ferdinand Being Mum and Dad, and that was a film about Rio needing help, really. He lost his wife, I think it was about a year and a half before we started filming, and he wanted help in how he could talk to his children around their grief. And I think he really felt, a bit like you, Mim, actually, that doing a documentary was the safest space for him to do that. He wasn't prepared to talk to counsellors or psychologists, and I think he felt safe that a documentary team would be looking after him and his family, and so the BBC commissioned it.
So if we just get into it a little more, because I know there are lots of programme makers in the room, and people have often talked about the fact that if you have a talent at the heart of an idea, it can make it easier to be commissioned. But that's sometimes hard to achieve. So if I start with you, Anne, if I'm in the audience and I'm a programme maker, and I want to persuade you to take part in something, you're no pushover. And indeed, it struck me, I've read your autobiography, and you actually talk about the abortion in your autobiography, and it had never been picked up, and it had never been spoken about more widely in the press or on television. What is the thing that would persuade you to agree to take part? If you've got the producers sitting in front of you trying to persuade you, what would make the difference for you and persuade you to share your story?
Well, she's sitting in the second row, actually, because we'd started the abortion. We'd agreed to do the film, and I had insisted that we did it at my home in the country because I thought the atmosphere would be good. I mean, slightly because I thought they'll find a house and people, my Auntie Betty in Birkdale, think that's my furniture. So I'd much prefer that they did it in my home. And we had, the casting had been brilliant. And we were on our way. We had director, producer, everything. And they were round my kitchen table. And Dawn Walker very cleverly left the important bit till last, and she said, what about talking about your own abortion? And it's true, I had written about it, and it is easier to write about it than to actually expose yourself on television. And interestingly, the 17 years between that autobiography and the documentary, and she'll tell you, I was very hesitant, and she said, she's quite stroppy, and she said, it's on public record. And she knew I knew that she was right. And she was so right, because it's the least I owed the other women coming to my home to do. I felt I had to do what I was asking them to do. And so it was really in my case, having a very determined producer who I trusted.
And what makes you, open to any of them, what makes you trust a producer or a director?
I think it's a very important relationship that needs to be very well thought out when going on a journey that is very intimate and very special to you. The reason why I actually said yes to this at this part of my life, because I had the idea for quite a while, about 3 or 4 years before, but I wasn't ready at the young age that I was to go and do this journey. I made a movie last year called Freehold, and the producer of that film is married to an executive producer at a production company called Lightbox, and she saw the film and basically had a meeting with me and said, I know you do a lot of creative work, is there anything that you'd want to make a documentary about? And I had this idea for a very long time, and I basically said it to her, and the relationship from there, it just felt so natural in a way that I didn't approach many different production companies and said, I've got this idea, I really need to make it, and I didn't just jump at the first production company that basically greenlit it and basically went and done it.
I think the relationship is key to whoever is behind the camera, the director, to opening you up. That is the only...
But what qualities are you looking for?
I'd already built a relationship with Leo Burley, who directed my Who Do You Think You Are? In fact, the Who Do You Think You Are was more terrifying because that was stepping into the unknown. And I remember when we'd filmed that and come back, and I was just terrified that I've cried on telly for the first time. I've exposed my family story. What will it be like? How are they going to edit it? And I was just panicky. Kind of talked to Leo. When I saw that is when I realised, oh my goodness, actually this can be made in a really sensitive way, in a really effective way, and can have a huge impact. And then I went and made that documentary would have only happened like that because I had that director.
I know, Matt, you feel the same way, because when we approached you about the Rio Ferdinand documentary, you wouldn't accept it until you'd met him and you felt comfortable. As a director, what are you worrying about?
I mean, if you want to know they're doing it for the right reasons, ultimately. And I wanted to meet him first, and within 3 minutes he started crying, and he broke down, and you could just tell that he needed help, and I was blown away by that from moment one, actually, and I thought... I want to make this film. He needs help, and it could help him as well, which was really interesting. But that sort of relationship is interesting because I don't know how other directors work, so it's quite interesting to hear how they do. But how much are you involved in that discussion? With do you like the surprise of not knowing what's coming up when you're filming, or do you like to be involved in the discussions?
I was actually I think I was a pain to work with because.
That's what they say, Mim.
The relationship between behind the scenes and talent. No, but I couldn't believe everything that was happening to me and how it naturally just happened on camera. Yeah. That my curious brain, which is sometimes a bit too curious, was thinking, you must have set this up. Yeah. You must have. Yeah. But there was no element of that to it. Yeah. I think we're always trying to get through and see what was the reality of the situation. But when something is so authentic and truthful, you just have to really let it be, and I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned.
It's very difficult if you're used to being in charge.
I'm going to come to that in a minute. I want to come to...
Why not allowed to come to it now?
Well, I just want to ask... No. I just want to ask before we move on, because you're sharing personal stories, but you're also sharing family. This is going to be difficult for me this hour, isn't it? We all know. I did reflect on the train that interviewing Anne Robinson might not be the easiest thing. I just want to come to it in quite a lot of depth, because you're ceding editorial control. But before we do, just that decision about taking part... actually, for all three of you, you're telling stories that really pertain to your families. In your case, your ex-husband and your daughter. Mim, it's a broader story about your family, and certainly Anita, it's the story of your grandfather. And you've been open about the fact that it's a history that isn't widely talked about.
And a dark history.
How do you navigate that thing of making the decision that you're going to take part, but do your family feel comfortable with you taking part? How did you all approach that?
Well, I think when Mim said that he had thought about making this programme a few years ago, but now was the point he was ready, I think that's the reason you make the programmes, the reason you say yes, is because you are ready to share with the audience that piece of story. And also you're kind of comfortable enough within yourself to go, you know what, I'm happy to discuss this in an authentic way, to use the word of the moment, which is the best word of the moment. For me, my family, I think because I'd already made the Who Do You Think You Are, and to be honest, I don't really pay much attention to what my family think, really. But also, they were, yeah, I didn't become a barrister for that reason, because I just ignored what they wanted me to do. They were more than happy. They felt so proud of the fact that I was on telly talking about our family history, because they saw it as bigger than just our story. I was telling a story that reflected a British Asian audience that had never had their story shared before in that way. So for me, it was just much bigger than my family. But I mean, I took my mum with me, for goodness sake, which was that was quite a big decision and quite difficult. And that put a whole new dynamic to working. And taking your mum on a work trip is like this whole other experience that I had to go through, but yeah.
And I think sometimes if you really have something telling you to do something, and you can see, be that members of your family, loved ones, people who really care about you, not really understanding why is it that there's something telling you to do something, it really takes a different type of focus to ignore that noise and just literally, in quite a selfish way, where you really I have to do this for my own self and my own sanity moving forward. Otherwise, I'm going to be left with a lot of questions that none of your loved ones are really going to be able to answer for you because they don't know the truth.
I think it's always difficult to be the child of someone who's on television, full stop. It exposes them in a way that they have no choice. I mean, abortion was particularly difficult for me. I wrote my autobiography in 2000, and the first marriage to Emma's father is detailed, and although he saw every page and was allowed to agree or disagree, and we sort of debated it, he was never at all happy about the book coming out. And therefore Emma, and I quite understood it, resolved not to read it. So when it came to John Walker bullying me into this, I was faced for the first time with having to discuss it with Emma. Now, the thing is, she's quite tricky, Emma. She's 47, she's got 2 children, she's done it all right, they're 8 and 9, she works part-time, she monitors the homework, they're not, la-di-da-di-da, all the things I didn't do. And I knew that to her, the idea of abortion, I mean, nobody agrees with abortion, but the idea that I had done this, by the time we made the documentary and now, I still feel shameful about it because I'm very aware that I could have gone the other way. I was just selfish enough to think I can't cope with this. So we were having a long journey from London, and I had to talk very gently to her, and I had to say, this is going to be in the documentary. I quite respect if you never see it, but it was, and you're right, Mim, there is this conflict between, can I put any more on my family, particularly your children, because they've got to deal with it, and your grandchildren, but actually my truth is my truth, and in this particular case, unpleasant as it was, and it really was difficult, I knew I had to do it.
I think this would be a good moment, actually, because you talk about it eloquently here, but in the clip as well, you talk about it in more detail. So if we could show the clip from Anne's documentary. So this is what I find really fascinating, and as promised, I'm coming back to that point. We all know that television is a really collaborative exercise, but I'm really conscious, and I think sometimes as directors and producers, we don't respect enough that sort of leap of faith that talent, as we like to call them, place in a team, because in the end, they are the people who are on screen, and we, producers, directors, commissioners, we're the people who are given the task of shaping the way the story is told and the way it lands, which is a really privileged thing to do. You guys are here telling the most personal, difficult, harrowing stories. Often, in fact, in the cases of all 3 of you, they're stories that have been buried for decades. How do you, and none of you are short of an opinion. You're all sort of confident. I know some of you better than others, but certainly Anne, you're not someone who's shy of sharing an opinion. How do you take that leap of faith and cede the editorial control to the programme makers? How do you sort of navigate that, and how does that feel?
Well, it does start with trust and integrity of your exec. I mean, without a doubt, so that when she says to you, no, that'll look too newsy, I know about journalism, I know about writing. I don't know anything about television. I really don't, except appearing on it. And therefore, I knew that I needed her skills. And there is just a moment when you know that she's got your back. And, for example, it sounds pathetic, but I am quite tricky. But she kept saying to me, "Don't look at the camera, look over here." And I said, "I want to look into the camera, I want to look into the camera." And she kept saying that. And you know, I had to go home and give myself a good talking to, because I thought, you know, she knows what she's doing. And there were many moments like that, either ones like which way to look, or her saying to me, "It's on public record," and really very skillfully. And what was tremendous about it was that you love an exec who doesn't talk too much. That's a really important thing if you're what's called the talent. Honestly, you just know you're in good hands when they're very measured. It's someone with a wonderful track record. And that, Alison, is the basis of it. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's trust and integrity.
Absolutely, I totally agree.
Do you go into it, Anita, with knowing where you're going to draw the line? So I know I'm going to go this far but not further.
Well, so mine really did start with the Who Do You Think You Are, because that was the first time I've ever made a programme where you're not told anything. The control is completely out of your hands. Yeah, up until that. I mean, I love making, when you make documentary, and now we live in an age where actually people are so used to seeing presenters reel on the telly. It's a camera that just follows you around. I'm in my element when I've got a roving camera and I'm just allowed to be free, and there's no stopping, there's no starting, there's no pickups. It's like, yes, no reverses. And I think the audience now are used to seeing that. So for me, I thought, okay, who do you think you are? I know how to be myself on screen, let's go. But it was a completely different way of working when you're not told anything, and then you have to completely trust what, you know, whoever is around you is set up. But actually, the exec at Wall to Wall did say something to me about that programme. They said two things can happen, and it all depends on the person in front of the camera. You can give them that scenario and put them in it, but you don't know where that scenario is going to go, because it will only come from how the person is going to react to what's in front of them. So Annie's programme, you know, you working with Rio or Mim, exactly the same. It's only because of how invested we are in the subject matter that we want to kind of give our all. And I said to my director, I'm not going to cry. I'm not a crier. I don't cry on telly, and I know that. I kind of know the line. But then when it's something so real and so personal, and you kind of accept that if I'm going to do this programme, I'm going to give it my all, there's no point in holding back if you're going to do it.
Well, I want to ask more about that. Let's show the clip first, because you do, in fact, cry, and we should explain. You're looking to find out what has happened to the first wife of your grandfather.
Yeah.
And this is the moment where...
Yeah, essentially, some of you may know, but during partition, my grandfather lost his entire first family, his wife, his 2 kids, his father. He was away with the British Indian Army, and that was it. And then India and Pakistan were divided. So no one in my family has stepped foot in Pakistan since 1947, and even then. So nobody knew what happened to the family. It's just been a family mystery or a family secret for 70 years.
And in this scene, you're meeting an elder from the community who has memories from the era. And let's have a look at it, and then let's talk about the crying point. So you're all very well versed in making television. I'm interested, when you go into the docs, do you sort of subconsciously think that you carry that expectation of having to deliver the tears moment? We saw Andrew Marr being very explicit about it there, saying, this is the moment you want me to cry. Do you sort of carry that expectation with you?
Not at all. That was the end of a long filming process. That was the final scene. And again, not told what I'm about to experience. And I was just going through this very real journey. Those tears, I didn't even realise. They just come. It just comes from the pit of your stomach. It's just, there is no... I don't cry, but every time I see that, tears come. So it's opened me up. It's liberated. It's kind of helped me as a human being, actually, get in touch with kind of some emotions. But that could only have happened because... Again, it comes back to the trust you have in the people behind the camera. You know, I felt in a space where I could just let it be. And also, I got to the point where why think about it in any other way? Just kind of get from this exactly what I want to know. The only thing that I'm doing that is obviously come down to me making TV shows for a while, and I've made a lot of TV programs in foreign countries, is that I'm translating.
Yeah.
And that that is the only thing that I guess I'm conscious of doing. But even then, it's almost instinctive. And a weird thing, actually, because I think in English is my first language. So by translating on screen, I'm also allowing it to sink into my head what he's saying. So it was quite interesting.
Was there a slight defence? Is it a defence mechanism as well? Because you can feel the emotion coming, and that's your default mode.
Possibly. It's a very hard skill to A, be in that situation anyway, but B, to translate on top of that.
Yeah.
Did you find it hard?
Yeah, with Rio, I mean, for those of us who've seen the documentary, he's emotional a lot through the film. And it's interesting because it was a real sort of present tense narrative. We both met him at the outset, and it was very clear he hadn't begun to properly grieve, and that he was going to through the course of making the film. So it felt like it was a real world exercise as well as a documentary. Did that, when he became emotional, and when there were moments when it became too much, what kind of pressure did that put on you as a director?
I don't know whether it's pressure. I mean, it's privilege. You know, I was amazed at what he was saying a lot of the time. And when talent are saying things out loud for the first time they've ever said it, you can see what it means to them. And, you know, the flip side I have with you guys is with that trust is kind of, when you're saying it, trust us to look after you, because, you know, otherwise we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. And so... yeah, it's a privilege rather than a pressure, I think.
But, I mean, it brings duty of care to a whole new
level.
level.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
tears can be very suspect. I mean, no, they can. Girls are the worst, because if you're about to criticise and you know, the tears, it's a very good act. You know, you're trying to tell someone off and the tears come down and everyone goes, oh, don't cry. And I normally only cry when there are sad dog stories. But in fact... I did cry. I don't think you caught it, Dom. But as they were leaving, we'd had 3 days of quite intense, and I got incredibly fond of everybody because they were so honest, and we'd all got to know each other, and I was very, very grateful for what they'd been prepared to do. And I do think we ask a lot of people. You know, I love the fact that we have told our stories, because you do feel a bit mugged and raped at the end of doing it, actually. You really do, and I think we ask other people to do it. And it's terrific that more and more we will do it ourselves. And I don't know whether it was Shakespeare or Liza Minnelli said, you're only as sick as your secrets. But actually it is, you know, all telling these things, it's very cathartic.
And I think audiences are very smart and very intelligent and are able to see through if somebody is faking it.
Totally.
So I think that was actually one of my biggest concerns with making this is I want everything to be as natural as it can. So I don't want to even force myself to feel like I have to be very emotional, because I'm being very vulnerable anyway. Yeah. And the worst thing that I think that I was looking at in my head during the creative process is if anybody says, oh, you was really faking it in that scene or that scene, because I know so far what we have filmed has been me living my truth with the camera in front of me.
And that's about putting you in the right scene to bring that emotion up.
Yeah.
And that's where the legwork sort of behind the scenes happens, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm really interested in this issue of editorial control and how you handle people on screen going through something that is authentically really emotional. And I think that the responsibility does lie with the director. I know when you were making Rio, at one stage he tried to stop filming. He felt he'd finished the film.
I had to sit in a cafe in Bromley he cancelled filming, and I got there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I sat in the cafe till 6 o'clock that night, waiting for him to call to see whether we could film, because he was wobbling. He was really wobbling about it.
And how do you, given the sensitivities around these subject areas, how do you sort of nudge someone towards carrying on?
You just got to keep that dialogue open. I mean, it was a constant dialogue with Rio, and so the scenes we did, I didn't brief him too much, but he was definitely involved in every decision of what we were going to film, because, you know, the big thing I learnt about grief is that, you know, obviously no two people's grief is the same, and so With a film that isn't about a personal experience, you can set up things for people to do, and they will do them. But when you're dealing with someone's grief, it's, I can't tell Rio how he should grieve. It has to come from Rio. So we would brainstorm things that he would feel comfortable doing, and then we'd go and find the relevant charity or people that could speak to that story. So it's just a constant dialogue, and it is baby steps. It's baby steps all the way.
You're quite right about that, because if you sat in the coffee shop from 6 o'clock to whenever, the last thing you need, if you're trying to be persuaded, is to be pestered.
Yeah.
Actually, you do. What you don't want on your hands is an anxious producer. I mean, no,
that is
trust
coming
me,
through loud
that
and
is
clear,
the
people.
last thing you want.
46 missed calls.
Even though Don Walker says, I'm worried about 100 times a day, you do need someone who is so steady that they leave you, and it's like the timing is so important.
And I do think it's quite a sophisticated, nuanced dance, this editorial control thing, because you have to take the subject with you. As you said, you would talk to him about the things you want to do, and you're constantly trying to maintain the editorial control, but bring that person with you. I know, Mim, I want to look at a scene in a minute where you find out that actually your father's still alive. If we have a look at it, and then we can talk about what happened subsequently. It's interesting because you're finding it hard to watch even here. How does it feel? Because likely the producers would have known that that's what you were going to discover. How does it feel finding that out for the first time when you know you're being filmed? And do you feel ambushed, or what's that moment like in terms of the relationship with the filmmakers?
Yeah, I remember leaving that house as soon as that film was finished, and the first question I asked is, how did you hold this information from me? How come you couldn't? You didn't have the ability to tell me. And then they turned around and they said, we didn't know that they were actually going to say that much detail, because just before this scene is the confirmation where I show them a picture and a photograph of what my father looked like. So they had a rough idea that they knew him, or they could have known him, but they didn't know if it was the exact person. But I think when they saw me, they were like, you look exactly like him. It's definitely your father. But yeah, I needed a moment to myself after that, about half an hour to an hour, to just be able to just let it really resonate and sink in.
Understandably. And then I know that when you first spoke to your father on the telephone, you haven't met him yet, you're still continuing the filming and you're going to go to Pakistan, but when you first spoke to him, you asked for it not to be filmed. Yeah. How did they receive that?
They obviously didn't want that to happen, because that was like a very pivotal golden moment for the documentary. So I knew they were going to be unhappy with that, but I'm revealing so much of myself within this film, literally everything. I know for me moving forward, I really needed something that is for me and between myself and him. And by expressing that, they finally, over time, understood. And
that's what I think is so interesting about this genre of programme making, because duty of care is always important, but I think it's paramount in films like this. Excuse me. And so whilst you always retain editorial control, you have to respect that duty of care imperative. And so if a contributor says, I don't feel comfortable, that's something you've got to pay heed to. Is that more challenging, do you think, than other types of films?
It's really interesting, because when you're in that scenario, like when you're in the trenches, you think, how could we possibly make the film without being there for that moment? And then actually when you sleep on it and take a breath, you think, well, actually, this is the whole reason we're here, and you've got to have a bit of give and take with people that are giving such incredible personal stories. You can't go in,
So, for example, Rio's Kids was a challenge.
Rio's Kids, and when on day one, I was like, well, how do we make a film about his children without showing the children? It's like, how do we do that? But, of course, that problem actually became a real strength to the film, I think, because it forced us on day one to sit back in every scene and have a distance between the subjects and us as filmmakers, and so it dictated for the whole film. Everything we filmed, we were, in the corners of rooms, or quite often I interviewed Rio without a camera. It was just microphones, and we were sitting on a sofa chatting. And that allowed him to get into a space, that he could talk openly and not feel like he was under the microscope the whole time.
I mean, there is a gap, isn't there, between you as the doc maker wanting a really terrific film and the subject. I mean, that's why the trust comes back again and again. But, I mean, I think that because all of us are also aware that you're after the best, and there is always a point, I've found, where you say no.
And when you hear that no, you've got to take notice of that no.
And that's why the control thing's quite interesting, because absolutely you have the editorial control once you've got the footage, but actually the power to say no is absolutely has the right to say.
Some no's you can argue with, but there's other no's you go, okay, that's that no, I'm not arguing with that one.
Non-negotiable. Absolutely non-negotiable.
Yeah.
And as a filmmaker, because it's something in the real world that's playing out authentically, how much are you pointing towards an endpoint? People always talk about... on the streets, everywhere I go, people come up to me and say, no, people have observed that last scene, which we'll see a bit of in a moment, of the Rio film, when he's with his children and they have the memory box. It was an incredibly moving scene. How much are you able, when you're making a program like this, to envisage where it might end whilst you're still in the sort of midst of making it?
Well, through our research, I knew that there were lots of things that charities did that are sort of vehicles to help families with their grief. And so there are a number of different things, I had in my head of how we could end the film, because, I felt Rio needed some sort of resolution to his grief, although, again, he'd probably be grieving for the rest of his life. But, within the film, we needed an ending. And so we talked about it. I said, do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? And again, when we got to the edit, we probably had half the film in the bag, and he thought filming was done.
I remember.
He thought, that's it. I've given my 10 days. I've done it. And I had to meet him from a flight in a hotel somewhere in London and say, we've got to do more. We need at least another 10 days. And it was a real shock to him. But
presumably you're looking for things that work in the real world narrative as well as in the sort of
and it has to be
narrative.
right for him, but it was the memory jar was the thing that he felt most comfortable doing. At that point, he still couldn't watch any videos of Rebecca or anything on his phone. He couldn't look at a photo of her because it was just too difficult for him to do. And so, because the obvious thing to have done is for him to look at old archive that, he's got a whole cupboard full of videos and things. But he didn't feel like he could do that. And ultimately, the big reason for him doing the film was to help his children. And so we needed to do something with the kids. But he didn't want, There's a moment in the film where he said, it's a real revelation. He said, I think the kids might be ready to talk to somebody, but I'm not. And that was a sort of penny-dropping moment for him, I think.
Let's look at the scene, and then I want to ask you a little bit about the legacy for Rio. It's hard to watch because that's his mum, who obviously has subsequently also passed away from breast cancer. It's just tragic. Whilst all of your films have received critical acclaim, and I'm sure yours, Mim, will go on to, and have had success in terms of audiences as well, there are people who are more cynical about them. And I think particularly around the Rio film, there were people who felt that perhaps he'd gone into it for more cynical reasons. And definitely I think it's repositioned how the public perceive him. I'm interested what your view is in terms of why he went into it and how true that is. And then I'd love to hear from you guys how you feel, because without a doubt these films will reposition you or will change perceptions of you.
It's like I said earlier, I don't think there's any doubt. When I first met him, he had his head on the table crying, saying, I need help. And there was no cameras at that point. And so, I knew there was no doubt in my mind that he wanted to do it and wanted to do it for the right reasons. And I think he felt comfortable knowing that we would look after him and the BBC would look after him. So, yeah.
I don't know about... I mean, you said this to me before it came on. I didn't know I had any position on television, really, to reposition myself. But after the abortion... No, well, who knows?
Well, I think, no, because I think you're known for being sort of ferociously smart and unafraid to speak your mind, and potentially quite terrifying for people. And I've nearly survived. I think people. I've known you for a while now, and actually, there's a much softer, warmer, nurturing side to you that you don't generally reveal, and you did within that documentary. And was that conscious, or was that just a byproduct of the subject matter?
No, I mean, I think, Weakest Link was a game, and a lot of the banter was rather what we were used to in any newspaper newsroom. Why are you fat? Why are you ugly, or whatever. But that was only, I mean, I am by trade an investigative journalist, and it was such a wonderful opportunity to look at a cuttings book, writing about the Abortion Act coming in and being there at the end. So that's really how it started. It was a fantastic opportunity. And if it allowed, a lot of people said afterwards, oh, gosh, it's the side of you we all know. But I'd never, I mean, when I did Weakest Link, I remember people used to say to me, God, you were so brave to be so horrible on television. And I didn't even think about it. I just thought, this is going to work. It's going to be terrific fun. And I suppose the flip side is with the abortion documentary that I did have an opportunity to do something else. But, I mean, I keep saying I'm the oldest woman on television, not judging cakes, so I've stopped worrying mostly about positioning myself.
But you can see in the films that there's an honesty to them, and you can see that the process for everyone is cathartic, and you can't massage that, can you? The truth is there, really.
I mean, for me, as someone who makes programmes and loves making documentaries, I think it's just that actually... I mean, I'd made 2 programmes that are completely different, but arguably the most exposing programmes I've ever done. Who Do You Think You Are? And Strictly, where it's if you are the audience, as you said, Mim, can sniff out a phony, and what they respond to, because they're essentially humans watching other humans on a screen, is authenticity and someone giving their all and going there for them, for the audience, for them to experience what you're going through. And that is, for me, it's the sweet spot. I've found the way that is the best way of working. And whether that's, abseiling off a cliff on Countryfile or, making that, to be able to just be yourself and the audience responding to that is amazing. Like, the audience want to see you being the idiot you on telly, and they kind of, I think it's a real, it's
I
good,
think
good
for me,
working.
it was, there was so much thought going into, do I do this or do I not do this? And I kept asking myself the question, why? Why are you doing this? As in, are you doing this for your career, or are you doing this for yourself? Because it's work that involves both part of your lives, which is personal and professional. And the personal outweighed the professional by so far, because this is something that I've been living with in my mind for the 27 years that I've been here on this earth. So for me, the only way to untackle that is by going out and actually getting really deep into the issue. Because a year ago, I made a video, it's called A Letter to My Mother, and it's a spoken word video where I was able to say everything that I wanted to say to her, but I can't really say in real life, just because of our relationship. And what that done for our relationship is it flourished it was an amazing, as in now me and my mum's relationship is beautiful because I took the step in creating a piece of art and then showed it to her. And I was like, how can I get that same thing with my father? And the only way that I thought that I could do it is by actually creating a piece of art. And that's why I felt this lended itself to documentary so well. And the reason why was so that all these issues that I have in my head, thinking about why does he not want me? How come he's never been in touch? What is he like? I'll be able to find out the sole truth of that by making a documentary. And that will be beneficial for myself, and it might help one or two other people in the process.
It will help. I mean, it's amazing that you've gone through this process for yourself, and it's a privilege that we can find this art form that will help you kind of do all the research, and it's amazing. But actually, I can't wait to see it go out, to see you, this amazing documentary making, but also the impact it will have. And that is fundamentally what this is about, this medium of television that actually will resonate with how many, hopefully, I don't know, 3.2 million? Who knows? Whatever it might be.
I just wonder if we have any other choice. I wonder if it's inevitably the direction we need to go in more, given the sort of unmediated, unvarnished access that the audience have to celebrities and social media. It's really sort of changed the nature of the discourse, and so the audience is always going to demand that level of intimacy, and there's no turning back. I think it's interesting, and perhaps if anyone's got any questions. Before we go to questions, I just want to ask, is there anything any of you regret about having done it, in terms of how your family reacted, public response, or has it been entirely a positive thing for you?
I didn't like my green dress.
I loved it, actually, Annie. I thought that's what I was going to say to you. It was a great green dress. I have to say, when Rio at the BAFTAs I thought he made the best speech at the BAFTAs, and it made me think, what an amazing documentary to have made, where a sportsman has been able to open himself up in a way on so many levels. He's talking about grief, he's talking about breast cancer, he's talking about being a single parent, all those things. On top of that, to see a footballer kind of open up to a generation of young men in Britain, I think on so many levels, it's a game changer, I mean, the reaction to my programme has been phenomenal, and I get it a lot from people just saying, incredible that this piece of history has been talked about, and has been talked about in such a kind of honest and authentic and sort of shame-free way. Somebody actually said to me, "Do we have to leave?" Someone said, watching that programme on so many levels, like talking about Indian history, kind of talking about it so openly for the first time, but actually you made it cool to be able to speak Punjabi on national telly, which is like, all right, I'll take that. It's been quite a big reaction.
There was a moment within filming where I had to get through to my dad, and I wasn't able to get through for whatever reason, and there was people that I was speaking to try and get through to him, and they just didn't want to have anything to do with me, because from their point of view, they're looking at it as, this guy is making a documentary and he doesn't really care about this relationship, he doesn't care about his father. So these were all of their thoughts. And it really angered me when I put the phone down, and I rang one of my best friends, and I was caught up in the heat of the moment, and I was saying, I regret this why did I do this? I didn't want to do it for this. And he was like, you do not regret this one bit. This is the best thing that you've probably done so far. And then hearing that makes you get reassurance to then go, yeah, no, you're actually right.
Well, I'd like to thank you all, because my ambition as a commissioner of programmes, and certainly the ambition of BBC Fact Check, is to make programmes that don't just entertain or enlighten. We really want to make programmes that impact people's lives and change the way they think and feel. And without a doubt, the programmes that you all have made either already have or will do that, and enable people to sort of share their stories, be they of grief or abortion or difficult family histories. It makes them more able to share them more freely. So that has to be a positive as far as I'm concerned. We've got 15 minutes now for questions, if there are any. I think there's one over here at the front.
Hi, my name's Eric. I'm an executive producer and a scout skip. I made the first film with Earl Spencer after Diana died, and it was one film, and it was 3 months after she died. Earl Spencer's a very posh person. I'm a scouser from a council estate, and that was the main reason I got to make the film. I'm really interested about the basis of the trust. I've also made a film following Eddie Izzard for 5 weeks, following his DNA history, and he's a very powerful character. But again, the point where it was getting close to who he really was a very difficult point for him. And I don't think he was as prepared to do the things that you guys talked about. And I'm interested in that point where, like when we film Ordinary People, there's particularly very sensitive stories. There is a point when, if you do an observational docs, it's quite a long-term thing. So you have to invest the relationship anyway, because you can't film for 2 months, then someone pulls out. But I just wonder about the point when maybe you thought that there was a no. You talked earlier about the point when you say no. Did you ever get to the no point, and what might that have been, potentially?
Mim's talked about his nose, so maybe Anita and Anne, if you talk about your nose.
I was quite nervous about having cameras in my house because I'm quite, my personal life is my personal life. But then I thought, gosh, if I want to tell this story, you kind of give it, it's a give and take, and you sit and you have a discussion. And I guess when I'm sure you're the same, Annie, when you're interviewing people, you sort of know what you have to give to kind of get the best out of that interview. You kind of know that you've got to eyeball this person and make them trust that you want them to kind of tell you stuff about their deeply personal life, like about their lives. It's just the relationship I built with Leo over the kind of filming of the Who Do You Think You Are, and then the idea of this partition. It was just, and also you trust that the people who are making the program, the editors. I made it with wall to wall, who they know what they're doing. I'm in safe hands. So at some point you've just got to go. This is going to be all right. I didn't get to a point where there was a no for me. They didn't, because I was there to tell us a big story. I wasn't kind of exposing something like Annie, I guess, talking about something that personal.
I can't remember getting to a no. I'm always not difficult, but demanding scripting, only because I'm more fussy about grammar than most, and also because I'm a writer. So it's hopeless, really, asking me to say something which I don't. I keep saying that's flabby journalism. You can't use some. I hate some people. Or lots of people. So that's really, I think, Don probably thinks differently, but I think that was the only time. And then it was not, I'd just say to her, I'm not saying that, Don. I wouldn't say that. Yeah. That's a terrible sentence.
Yeah, true. You argue over what the scripts, what they're going to make you say, what they want you to say. That's definitely...
So bad grammar is the no. That's a line not to cross.
You in television, your grammar is appalling.
Any other questions? The lady at the back there.
Whoa. Hi. I'm just wondering what you think about programme makers opening up as well. If I have an idea about something that's very personal to me, sometimes I think, I wouldn't want to even pitch that idea to someone because I don't necessarily want them to know that that's an issue that affects me or a private thing. But so I suppose, just in general, do you think programme makers should be honest about why they want to tackle a topic? And also, would it help you to trust a programme maker if they revealed that they had experienced the same thing or that that's why they're passionate about it?
Yeah, 110%. I couldn't agree more, because even with my documentary, when my exec turned around to me and said, we have a handful of directors that we've shortlisted that we would love to work with you, and they've made great films, but we want you to meet them first. The reason why I chose Lottie, who directed the documentary, is because she had been through something similar to me, and she didn't have the best relationship with her father, which really resonated with me, because I felt during the process of creating this, there's a bond already there between us about something that we connect with and that we can talk to, and a level of empathy that maybe if I had gone with working with another director, they might not have just understood that in the heightened way that Lottie would have.
Interesting, because I've just got another doc out called The Trouble with Women.
Thursday night.
Thursday.
BBC One.
BBC One. And my director charmingly disagreed with me on almost everything. Because there's an age gap, and I respected her, but it was quite interesting to hear. And she would occasionally pull a face as I was saying something. And so I don't think it's a bad thing either to have somebody, and it's more likely to happen to someone like me because there's a generational gap of somebody who thinks something completely different. And it's also quite good to know that you are saying something that some people are going to violently disagree with. So I don't think it's... I think it's lovely if you have someone who's as interested in the subject as you are. They have to be interested in the subject, but I don't mind if their views on the subject are entirely different.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I'm happy that they have a different opinion, as long as they know how to make good telly. Yeah. As long as when they get in the edit, they know what they're doing. You know, you need somebody who's got control of the situation and kind of knows what they're doing. You don't want someone who's so invested in the subject matter but doesn't see the bigger picture. You want kind of balance, don't you?
I mean, I'd definitely open up to to the people I'm filming with, to give myself to them. If you're asking them to do something, you've got to go there with them, I think. I mean, my wife always says that I disappear emotionally whenever I'm filming something. And you sort of do, because you're in it, and you have to give yourself to that process.
And I do it when I'm interviewing people. Like, you are, for me, it's just a real experience when that camera's on and you're sitting with somebody and you're looking them in the eye. You have to genuinely be invested in that person, otherwise they're not going to tell you anything. Yeah. You know, it has to be real.
Do you want to? Was there a lady next to you? If you just pass the mic across, does someone next to you have a question, or just in front there?
Hi. So you guys have clearly, exposed your life situations and life circumstances in these films, which I think is a brave thing to do. How would you deal with social media backlash? Because these are things so personal to you in your life. And, even if one person says something, does it affect you? Would it discourage you from wanting to do another similar film to this?
That's a good question.
I think you really got to just ignore all of that stuff. You can't let the negative trolls or people that have their opinion on something really get to you about that, because you know the reason why you done it, and you need to really stay focused on why you done it. Otherwise, if you got caught up with backlash or people not agreeing with why you done something, exposing something that might not have should have been exposed, that could send you down a really downward spiral.
I use something that someone I highly respect and admire. In fact, it was Anne Robinson when we did Watchdog together. You said to me, in this industry, you need to have broad shoulders. And I've kind of taken that and run with it. And actually just ignore the nutters on Twitter, because there are just a million. It's just okay, if it's something important, engaging, fine. Otherwise, the rest of it, you can't, like you say, if it's authentic to you and you put it out there, you've got to go with the positive stuff. And yeah.
And it's not real. They're hiding behind a phone and a keyboard. Do you know what I mean? If somebody came up and really disagreed with an issue or a viewpoint within the documentary and had discourse and a conversation with me, I would wholeheartedly be like, I would really want to understand your viewpoint. But if it's just negative words and abuse on Twitter, I don't even give that any attention.
No, you can't.
Annie?
Well, I'm not even on anything.
That is the way to deal with it.
But, people don't think before they write this stuff. I mean, I treasure a letter I've got from years ago which says, Dear Miss Robinson, I loathe how you look. I hate everything you say on television. I can't stand your voice. Best wishes and have a happy Christmas.
Any other questions? I think we've got time for a couple more quick ones, if anyone's got any. Yeah, there's one at the front here.
Do you feel that you've been involved in the documentary, if that's changed the direction of your career? Do you've been asked to do something different to what you'd been done before, different styles of work since making your programmes?
I think this is interesting for Rio. That's why I think that's why people are cynical about Rio, because it has changed opportunities, I think, though that's not why he went into it. Would you agree?
That's hard for me to answer that one, yeah. I think it's definitely changed the public perception of him, without a doubt. I've got no idea what he's going to go and do next, though. So,
For any of you? Do people react to you in a different way? Has it presented different career opportunities?
My mind hasn't come out yet, so...
You're waiting to see.
I'm hoping that it will. Yeah. My agent is agreeing as well.
I don't know. For me, it kind of feels like I was on that, it felt like a natural place to be. And I'm kind of in that sphere where I'm very happy to be me in any given scenario. And even though it was a deeply personal story, I was still telling a piece of history. I guess for you, Annie, people do see you as kind of, watchdog and weekly slate.
I was really, I'm chuffed to be able to do journalism, but I don't know how much it changes people's perception, because people still put a phone in front of me and say, my gran really loves you. Can you say she is the weakest link? Goodbye.
I think as a commissioner, I would say if people are wanting to take part in something like this to change perception of them, you can really smell that from the outset, and that's when it feels like it's a project you wouldn't necessarily want to move forwards with. Time for one more, if there is are any more questions in the room? That was bad grammar. Don't shout at me.
So where's the guys who ask the questions?
Oh, there's one just here.
My question is a bit more specific towards Mim, but it could be applied to Anita as well. I just wanted to know your process behind the filmmaking aspect of it, because your documentaries have more revelations than the other ones do, because you're not really sure what the endpoint might be. And Mim, specifically to you, you probably didn't have an idea of whether your father was alive or not. So during the process and at the beginning stages, how did you think you were going to end it? Or what was the point where you thought, I already know how he was and what happened? Was that going to be the end point? Or
Yeah, no, it was actually one of the scariest things to even, and one of the most rockiest periods of my life, because I'm such a control freak that I need to know how things are ending and where we're going and what's going to happen with everything. And because there was no answer to this, it just put me in a very weird part of my life that I just wanted to get out of straight away. So that moment that you watched there, that was the moment afterwards where I could then go, okay, so now I know this information, that he is alive, that he is in a different country, so now I can work towards going there. But before that, it's like you're in a maze, and you don't know whether it's going to be blocked. Because then if I found out that he had passed away, A, I'd be really upset because I never got to reconnect with the man that brought me into this world. But then B, it's not going to really make that great of a documentary now, because he went to look for his dad and he found out he's dead, So now knowing that he's alive, I still don't know what's going to happen because I haven't met the man yet. But there's more hope, and there's something to work towards, to go forward to.
But it makes for a better film. If you know the beginning at the end at the beginning, then the rushes will tell that, won't they? And the viewer will smell that. And so going on a genuine journey where you don't know where the end is thrilling, isn't it?
Yeah. We're out of time. Would you join me in thanking this extraordinary panel who are